In this video, we're going to look at how to use a protractor to determine an angle. So notice I'm going to move this protractor out of the way. Notice we have a line here, and then we have lines coming from the same vertice that represent different angles, right? And you're going to notice that on the protractor that there are actually two different sets of numbers. There are a set of numbers on the top and a set of numbers on the bottom. And that's because it depends on which way you're viewing the angle. Is going to depend on which set of numbers you use. Now the first and most important thing is I do want you to notice that in this protractor it looks like what I call a crosshair. So you have these two lines that intersect each other, and you can see an open dot in the middle, and that's so that you can put that dot over your vertice of where you're going to find your angle, and then you can line up the line that's horizontal with your horizontal line, and you can line up the line that's vertical if you have one with any line that's vertical, making a 90-degree angle. Now once you line this up, you can then find what each of these angles values are. And so what I want to mention is with these two sets of numbers is you use the bottom set of numbers if you're trying to determine what the angle is, and you're looking at it from left to right. So in other words, if you're starting here at 0 degrees and then you're going over to the left, you're going to be using your bottom numbers on the protractor. I'll put this back up there so you can see. So just to give you an example, if I was looking at angle 1 is right here. Notice it lines up with 30. So angle 1, this horizontal line is lined up, and if I follow from that vertice through that line, notice it stops right at 30. So angle 1 is equal to 30 degrees. And I could find all the rest of the angles too if I was going from right to left. Right, the next one is at 50, we have one at 90, 120, and 135. Now on the other hand, if you're looking at the angle from left to right, so the top numbers are used whenever you're looking at an angle starting from the left going to the right. Considering that this is 0 here, right? And then you go over to the right. So for instance, if we wanted to find the angle of A, B, D, or what we could also call angle 2, representing this particular angle, going from left to right, then I would get my protractor. I'm going to go ahead and line up that dot with the vertice. Notice I'm going to line up these horizontal lines with my existing horizontal line as well. And once I get it all lined up, I can go ahead and look and see, okay, there's D right there, and that lines up with the top value of 45. So I can say that this angle right here is 45 degrees. Now let's go ahead and start filling in the angles that it asks for. So notice I have some questions here just to show you how to find them. We already found angle 1 using our protractor, and so I'm going to go ahead and put that value, angle 1, in other words, from this line up to this line, which is H. Angle 1 could also be referred to as angle CBH. So we already found some of our angles. For instance, right, we found this angle number 1, which is equal to 30 degrees. And that's the measure of angle 1. The measure of angle 2, we just found that, right? That's from this black line over to this pink one. It's also referred to as angle ABD, and it's 45 degrees. Now, next I'm going to find the measure of angle 3, which is going to look a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and take my protractor, and I'm going to put it on here on the vertice and line it up with my horizontal line. And now that I've done that, so I do want you to notice that angle 3 is just this section. I'm going to get my pen and kind of draw an arrow. So we're not going from this edge right here. Now when that happens, there's a couple different things that you can do to solve it. One thing that you could do is you could recognize that going from this right side up to the left, that the beginning of that angle is right here, which lines up with 50 on the bottom, and it goes over to 90 on the bottom. So I could say 90 minus 50 and that would give me 40. And that's one way I could find that angle. Another way is you could actually just rotate the protractor and just say, well, since this line right here, G, is the bottom of the angle, it's where it starts, I could then line up my vertice and then line up my line with 0 on G. In other words, G is going to be my new 0. And then just follow that into where it goes and ends at F. And notice it lines up with 40. So regardless if I turn my protractor to measure out that 40, or if I leave it where it's at, and I just go ahead and recognize it starts at 50 and ends at 90, and I do 90 minus 50, it gives me 40. So that's two different ways that you can find it, or I should say two different ways you can use your protractor to find that this angle is 40 degrees. Now me personally, I prefer not to subtract. You know, if I have a real protractor in my hand and I have an angle I'm measuring, I'm simply going to just turn this and line it up with the base of the angle, that first line that would normally be horizontal, and then just see where it ends and terminates. That's how I would do it. However, I've noticed on some of your teachers' work, you have a protractor that's set in place and you cannot turn it. And some of y'all, as you've looked at it, have asked me, well, how do I find this if I can't move the protractor? And that's how you find it. You just line it up, see where it starts, see where it ends, and subtract the beginning from the end. 90 minus 50, 40 degrees. So therefore, angle 3 is going to be 40 degrees. So before I end this video, I'm going to find a few more angles, and I'm going to name them a little bit differently, right? Because we can name the angles differently. So for instance, let's look at this one. Notice this says, what is the measure of angle ABH? Remember that the center number is always going to be your vertice. So the center number is always the vertex. In other words, it's always going to be the point which is in the middle of the angle. So since this is ABH, I'm looking at the angle, and I'm going to use my highlighter to highlight it. I'm going from A to B and then to H, which is up here. So what I highlighted yellow. So notice this is actually a very large angle that we're looking at, right? Because I'm actually looking from here all the way over to here. Now I am going to use my protractor to go ahead and look at that highlighted angle. So I'm going to put it back on here. And it looks like there's A, B, and then up to H. And remember, since I'm going from left to right, notice I even made a little arrow that points from left to right. I'm going to be using the top numbers. So ABH is going to be 150 degrees. So 150 degrees. Now next I'm going to find angle CBG. So I'm going to highlight that one with my pink highlighter. So I'm looking for C, B, and G. So here's C. I'm going to go over to B, and then I'm going to go up to G. So again, so now we're going to be going, looking from the right over to the left. So I'm going to get my protractor, put it back on, get it zeroed in, and if it starts at 0 and it goes up to location G, notice that lines up with the bottom number that's 50 degrees. So that one is going to be 50 degrees, the whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and write right here 50 degrees. I think you get the point, so I'm not going to highlight anything else. I'm just going to start checking the angles. Next we have angle, the measure of angle ABC. So we go from A to B to C. Now I do want you to notice that that is a special situation. And notice if I go from A to B to C, I'm actually starting here. I'm going over all the way to the right until it comes back down to a straight line. We also call this a straight angle, right? Because it makes a straight line. And all straight angles are equal to 180 degrees. So just keep that in mind. This is a straight angle and it is 180 degrees. The next thing that I'm going to do is we're going to check 3 more angles. So let me move this up a little bit. So we only have 3 more angles to find at this time. So we're going to go ahead and find angle CBF. Notice B is in the middle. That's our vertex. So CBF. I'm going to move this down. And if I do CBF, I go from C to B to F. that goes straight up. I'm going to put my protractor on it. And if I'm looking at angle C to B and then to F, notice that makes a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to go ahead and put CBF is 90 degrees. Another indicator of that, right, is that you can see clearly that it forms the side of a square, right? So it makes this 90-degree angle. In other words, if I get my black pen, that angle right here. And usually we put that little box symbol represented that is a 90-degree angle from C to B to F. We also want to find ABG. So if I find ABG, I go from A to B and then up here to G. So I'm going to be going to this point. I'm going to kind of just make it a little bit larger, easy to find. Then me going to get my protractor and put it on there. So if I go from A to B and to G, I'm going to go ahead and use my top values because I'm moving from left to right, and that is 130 degrees, this number up here on top. So 130 degrees. Now I'm going to find angle, the measure of angle A, B, and E. So that's our last one. So I'm going to go from A to B and then up here to E. So I'm just going to make that a little bit larger, easy to spot. Put my protractor on it. And E looks like it lines up with 60. So from A to B to E, that angle is 60 degrees. In other words, from here all the way to here is 60 degrees. Now that we've measured all these angles, there's just one more thing that I've seen the teachers asking you to do. So I want to make sure that you know how to do it. Is now that we have found the measures of all of our angles, we're going to go ahead and go back and we're going to classify each one of these angles as either a straight angle, an acute angle, an obtuse angle, or a right angle. Now just remember, I'm going to give you some definitions. When we talk about a straight angle, that means that the angle, so I'm going to put the measure of the angle, has to be equal to 180 degrees. When it's an acute angle, keep in mind that that means that the measure of that angle has to be less than 90 degrees. On the other hand, for an obtuse angle, the measure of those angles must be greater than 90 degrees. And then in some situations we have a right angle, which means the measure of the angle has to be equal to 90 degrees. So this is just going to be your criteria. Remember, straight angles are equal to 180 degrees. Acute angles are going to be less than 90 degrees. And obtuse angles are going to be greater than 90 degrees. And right angles are going to be equal to 90 degrees. All right, so let's use that criteria real quick, and I'm just going to write the name under each one. So notice on a straight angle, I only had one straight angle out of all these angles, and that was this one right here. That was 180 degrees. So I'm going to write underneath it, this was a straight angle. And then when it comes to my acute angles, that's anything less than 90 degrees. So this one right here was an acute angle. And this is an acute angle. This one is also an acute angle. This 50 down here, that was an acute angle. And the last one is angle ABE, was an acute angle. When it came to our obtuse angles, the angles that measured greater than 90 degrees, our obtuse angles would include angle ABH, it would also include angle ABG. And the only one we have left is our angle CBF. And CBF, notice it is equal to 90 degrees, which makes it a right angle. So now you not only know how to use a protractor, but you know how to find the degrees and classify it as either acute, obtuse, right angle, or straight angle. I hope this helps you.